Okay, good afternoon or early evening on a Saturday. Today I'll be reading from the Archetypes of the Collective Unconscious by C.G. Jung, and I'll be reading part 4 of the essay by the same name, Archetypes of the Collective Unconscious. And I want to urge you to catch tomorrow's live stream, which will be The Black Magician. That's a very important, at least I believe, segment of this essay, and so I urge you to listen to it. I'm going to try to do it at 11 a.m. It's Sunday, so I don't think the people that are fixing the shingles outside my window will be there tomorrow. Anyway, one can hope. So, I am going to begin the reading. I am on paragraph 49 of Archetypes of the Collective Unconscious, page 23. Whether primitive or not, mankind always stands on the brink of actions it performs. Let me read that again. I got distracted. Whether primitive or not, mankind always stands on the brink of actions it performs itself, but does not control. The whole world wants peace, and the whole world prepares for war, to take but one example. Mankind is powerless against mankind, and the gods, as ever, show it the ways of fate. Today we call the gods factors, which comes from facer, to make. The makers stand behind the wings of the world theater. It is so in great things as in small. In the realm of consciousness, we are our own masters. We seem to be the factors themselves. But if we step through the door of the shadow, we discover with terror that we are the objects of unseen factors. To know this is decidedly unpleasant, for nothing is more disillusioning than the discovery of our own inadequacy. It can even give rise to primitive panic, because instead of being believed in, the anxiously guarded supremacy of consciousness, which is in truth one of the secrets of human success, is questioned in the most dangerous way. But since ignorance is no guarantee of security, and in fact only makes our insecurity still worse, it is probably better, despite our fear, to know where the danger lies. To ask the right question is already half the solution of a problem. At any rate, we then know that the greatest danger threatening us comes from the unpredictability of the psyche's reactions. Discerning persons have realized for some time that external historical conditions of whatever kind are only occasions, jumping off grounds for the real dangers that threaten our lives. These are the present politico-social delusional systems. We should not regard them casually. We should not regard them causally as necessary consequences of external conditions, but as decisions precipitated by the collective unconscious. Now, let me set this up because I want to read that paragraph again. It is so important. And so let me do that once more. Paragraph 49. Whether primitive or not, mankind always stands on the brink of actions it performs itself, but does not control. The whole world wants peace, and the whole world prepares for war. To take but one example, mankind is powerless against mankind, and the gods, as ever, show it the ways of fate. Today we call the gods factors, which comes from facer, to make. The makers stand behind the wings of the world theater. It is so in great things as in small. In the realm of consciousness, we are our own masters. We seem to be the factors themselves. But if we step through the door of the shadow, we discover with terror that we are the objects of unseen factors. To know this is decidedly unpleasant, for nothing is more disillusioning than the discovery of our own inadequacy. It can give rise to primitive panic because instead of being believed in, the anxiously guarded supremacy of consciousness, which is in truth one of the secrets of human success, is questioned in the most dangerous way. But since ignorance is no guarantee of security, and in fact only makes our insecurity still worse, it is probably better, despite our fear, to know where the danger lies. To ask the right question is already half the solution of a problem. At any rate, we then know that the greatest danger threatening us comes from the unpredictability of the psyche's reactions. Discerning persons have realized for some time that external historical conditions of whatever kind are only occasions, jumping off grounds for the real dangers that threaten our lives. These are the present politico-social delusional systems. We should not regard them causally as necessary consequences of external conditions, but as decisions precipitated by the collective unconscious. Paragraph 50. This is a new problem. All ages before us have believed in gods in some form or other. Only an unparalleled impoverishment of symbolism could enable us to rediscover the gods as psychic factors, that is, as archetypes of the unconscious. No doubt this discovery is hardly credible at present. To be convinced, we need to have the experience pictured in the dream of the theologian. That dream comes tomorrow. For only then do we experience the self-activity of the spirit moving over the waters. Since the stars have fallen from heaven and our highest symbols have paled, a secret life holds sway in the unconscious. That is why we have a psychology today and why we speak of the unconscious. All this would be quite superfluous in an age of culture that possess symbols. Symbols are spirit from above, and under those conditions, the spirit is above too. Therefore, it would be a foolish and senseless sway of nature. Our unconscious, on the other hand, hides living water, spirit that has become nature, and that is why it is disturbed. Heaven has become for us the cosmic space of the physicists. Heaven has become for us the cosmic space of the physicists, and the divine imperium a fair memory of things that once were. But the heart glows, and a secret unrest gnaws at the roots of our being. In the words of Volospá, we may ask, quote, "What murmurs Wotan over Mimir's head? Already the spring boils," unquote. Paragraph 51. Our concern with the unconscious has become a vital question for us, a question of spiritual being or non-being. All those who have had an experience like that mentioned in the dream know that the treasure lies in the depths of the water and will try to salvage it. I'm sorry, that was the dream of the pearl, the hymn of the pearl that I had mentioned yesterday. It isn't the one you're going to hear about tomorrow, which is the dream of the black magician. So anyway, let me just begin that paragraph again. Our concern with the unconscious has become a vital question for us, a question of spiritual being or non-being. All those who have had an experience like that mentioned in the dream know that the treasure lies in the depths of the water and will try to salvage it. As they must never forget who they are, they must on no account imperil their consciousness. They will keep their standpoint firmly anchored to the earth and will thus, to preserve the metaphor, become fishers who catch with hook and net that swims in the water. There may be consummate fools who do not understand what fishermen do, but the latter will not mistake the timeless meaning of their action, for the symbol of their craft is many centuries older than the still unfaded story of the Grail. But not every man is a fisherman. Sometimes this figure remains arrested at an early, instinctive level, and then it is an otter, as we know from Oscar Schmidt's fairy tales. Paragraph 52. Whoever looks into the water sees his own image, but behind it, living creatures soon loom up. Fishes, presumably, harmless dwellers of the deep, harmless if only the lake were not haunted. They are water beings of a peculiar sort. Sometimes a nixie gets into the fisherman's net, a female, half-human fish. Nixies are entrancing creatures. Quote, half drew she him, half sank he down, and never more was seen. Unquote. Paragraph 53. The nixie is an even more instinctive version of a magical feminine being whom I call the anima. She can also be a siren, Melusina, mermaid, wood nymph, grace, or Earl King's daughter, or a lamia or succubus who infatuates young men and sucks the life out of them. Let me read that again, as that's one of the most important sentences for young men. And the nixie is an even more instinctive version of a magical feminine being whom I call the anima. She can also be a siren, Melusina, mermaid, wood nymph, grace, or Earl King's daughter, or a lamia or succubus who infatuates young men and sucks the life out of them. Moralizing critics will say that these figures are projections of soulful emotional states and are nothing but worthless fantasies. One must admit that there is a certain amount of truth in this. But is it the whole truth? Is the nixie really nothing but a product of moral laxity? Were there not such beings long ago, in an age when dawning human consciousness was still wholly bound to nature? Surely there were spirits of forest, field, and stream long before the question of moral conscience ever existed. What is more, these beings were as much dreaded as adored, so that their rather peculiar erotic charms were only one of their characteristics. Man's consciousness was then far simpler, and his possession of it absurdly small. An unlimited amount of what we now feel to be an integral part of our psychic being disports itself merrily for the primitive in projections ranging far and wide. Good afternoon. Jung, not young, yes. And when you read Jung books, do you read from cover to cover, or do you read his books in parts? I would say I do both because I'm working on a special video in the next couple of days on the Savior archetype as it applies to our current Savior archetype, Beto O'Rourke. And when I'm doing that, I have to look at volume 20 of the collected works, which is the index of the whole collected works, and find the various mentions of Savior so that I can bring it all together. But otherwise, sometimes I do read them end to end, and you can find the reading of the answer to Job and on the YouTube channel. And if you're in the advanced reading group, you can also get the reading of Ion and the seminar on Ion. And so I'm not reading this one end to end, but I am trying to read the essay end to end. And Sean says, I just read paragraph 76 and laughed about how brilliantly Carl Jung sees into images. And see, I have to pull this over just a tad so that I can see all the chat. Okay, where was I? Okay, paragraph 54. The word projection is not really appropriate, for nothing has been cast out of the psyche. Rather, the psyche has attained its present complexity by a series of acts of introjection. Its complexity has increased in proportion to the despiritualization of nature. An alluring nixie from the dim bygone day is today called an erotic fantasy, and she may complicate our psychic life in a most painful way. She comes upon us just as a nixie might. She sits on top of us like a succubus. She changes into all sorts of shapes like a witch, and in general displays an unbearable independence that does not seem at all proper in a psychic content. Occasionally, she causes states of fascination that rival the best bewitchment, or unleashes terrors in us not to be outdone by any manifestation of the devil. She is a mischievous being who crosses our path in numerous transformations and disguises, playing all kinds of tricks on us, causing happy and unhappy delusions, depressions and ecstasies, outbursts of an effect, etc. Even in a state of reasonable introjection, the nixie has not laid aside her roguery. The witch has not ceased to mix her vile potions of love and death. Her magic poison has been refined into intrigue and self-deception, unseen, though nonetheless dangerous for that. Does that sound like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez? You have to go back and listen to that video. She is certainly arising as the anima of the nation, for better or for worse. Truth Convoy says, pure evil, goodbye, you fake. You are a propagandist, nothing more. Okay, goodbye. Phil Anderson, Truth Convoy, the pronunciation of Jung varies according to the local accent. Right, I guess so. Anyway, we love our haters as much as our lovers. Paragraph 55. But how do we dare to call this elfin being the anima? Anima means soul and should designate something very wonderful and immortal. Yet this was not always so. We should not forget that this kind of soul is a dogmatic conception whose purpose it is to pin down and capture something uncannily alive and active. The German word seal is closely related via the Gothic form saivalo to the Greek word eidos, which means quick moving, changeful of hue, twinkling, something like a butterfly, which reels drunkenly from flower to flower and lives on honey and love. In Gnostic typology, the psychic man is inferior to the spiritual man, and finally there are wicked souls who must roast in hell for all eternity. Even the quite innocent soul of the unbaptized newborn babe is deprived of the contemplation of God. Among primitives, the soul is the magic breath of life, hence the term anima, of a flame. An uncanonical saying of our Lord's aptly declares, "Whoso is near unto me is near to the fire." For Heraclitus, the soul at the highest level is fiery and dry, perhaps because as such is closely akin to cool breath. It means to breathe, to blow, chill and damp. I'm sorry, I'm skipping the Greek words he's put in here because I am not quite familiar enough with the Greek alphabet yet to read it right off. Thank you, Phil. I appreciate your comment. Paragraph 56. Being that has soul is living being. Let me read that again. Paragraph 56. Being that has soul is living being. Soul is the living thing in man, that which lives of itself and causes life. Therefore, God breathed into Adam a living breath, that he might live. With her cunning play of illusions, the soul lures into life the inertness of matter that does not want to live. She makes us believe incredible things, that life may be lived. She is full of snares and traps, in order that man shall fall, should reach the earth and tangle himself there, and stay caught so that life should be lived, as Eve in the Garden of Eden could not rest content until she convinced Adam of the goodness of the forbidden apple. Were it not for the leaping and twinkling of the soul, man would rot away in his greatest passion, idleness. A certain kind of reasonableness is its advocate, and a certain kind of morality adds its blessing. But to have soul is the whole venture of life, for soul is a life-giving demon who plays his elfin game above and below human existence, for which reason, in the realm of dogma, he is threatened and propitiated with superhuman punishments and blessings that go far beyond the possible deserts of human beings. Heaven and hell are the fares meted out to the soul, and not to civilized man, who in his nakedness and timidity would have no idea what to do with himself in a heavenly Jerusalem. Paragraph 57. The anima is not the soul in the dogmatic sense, not an anima rationalis, which is a philosophical conception, but a natural archetype that satisfactorily sums up all of the statements of the unconscious, of the primitive mind, of the history of language and religion. It is a factor in the proper sense of the word. Man cannot make it. On the contrary, it is always the a priori element in his moods, reactions, impulses, and whatever else is spontaneous in psychic life. It is something that lives in itself that makes us live. It is a life behind consciousness that cannot be completely integrated with it, but from which, on the contrary, consciousness arises. For, in the last analysis, psychic life is for the greater parts an unconscious life that surrounds consciousness on all sides, a notion that is sufficiently obvious when one considers how much unconscious preparation is needed, for instance, to register a sense impression. Paragraph 58. Although it seems as if the whole of our unconscious psychic life could be ascribed to the anima, she is yet only one archetype among many. Therefore, she is not characteristic of the unconscious in its entirety. She is only one of its aspects. This is shown by the very fact of her femininity. What is not I, not masculine, is most probably feminine, and because the not I is felt as not belonging to me and therefore an outside me, the anima image is usually projected upon women. Paragraph 59. With the archetype of the anima, we enter the realm of the gods, or rather the realm that metaphysics has reserved for itself. Everything the anima touches becomes numinous, unconditional, dangerous, taboo, magical. She is the serpent in the paradise of the harmless man with good resolutions and still better intentions. She affords the most convincing reasons for not prying into the unconscious, an occupation that would break down our moral inhibitions and unleash forces that had better been left unconscious and undisturbed. As usual, there is something in what the anima says, for life in itself is not good only, it is also bad. Because the anima wants life, she wants both good and bad. These categories do not exist in the elfin realm. Bodily life, as well as psychic life, have the impudence to get along much better without conventional morality, and they often remain the healthier for it. My. Paragraph 60. The anima believes in the beautiful and the good, a primitive conception that antedates the discovery of the conflict between aesthetics and morals. It took more than 1,000 years of Christian differentiation to make it clear that the good is not always the beautiful and the beautiful not necessarily good. The paradox of this marriage of ideas troubled the ancients as little as it does the primitives. The anima is conservative and clings in the most exasperating fashion to the ways of earlier humanity. She likes to appear in historic dress, with a predilection for Greece and Egypt. In this connection, we would mention the classic anima stories of Rider Haggard and Pierre Benoit, the Renaissance dream known as the hypnerotomachia of Polyphilo, and Goethe's Faust likewise reached deep into antiquity in order to find le vrai mot for the situation. Polyphilo conjured up Queen Venus, Goethe, Helen of Troy, and Yella Yaffe has sketched a lively picture of the anima in The Age of Biedermeier and the Romantics. If you want to know what happens when the anima appears in modern society, I can warmly recommend John Erskine's Private Life of Helen of Troy. She is not a shallow creature, for the breath of eternity lies over everything that is really alive. The anima lives beyond all categories, and can therefore dispense with blame as well as with praise. Since the beginning of time, man, with his wholesome animal instinct, has been engaged in combat with his soul and its demonism. If the soul were uniformly dark, it would be a simple matter. Unfortunately, this is not so, for the anima can appear also as an angel of light, a psychopomp who points the way to the highest meaning, as we know from Faust. Paragraph 61. If the encounter with the shadow is the apprentice piece in the individual's development, then that with the anima is the masterpiece. The relation with the anima is again a test of courage and an ordeal by fire for the spiritual and moral forces of man. We should never forget that in dealing with the anima, we are dealing with psychic facts which have never been in man's possession before, since they were always found outside, for they were always found outside as psychic territory, so to speak, in the form of projections. For the son, the anima is hidden in the dominating power of the mother, and sometimes she leaves him with a sentimental attachment that lasts throughout life and seriously impairs the fate of the adult. On the other hand, she may spur him on to the highest flights. To the men of antiquity, the anima appeared as a goddess or a witch, while for medieval men, the goddess was replaced by the Queen of Heaven and the Mother Church. The desymbolized world of the Protestant produced first an unhealthy sentimentality and then a sharpening of the moral conflict, which, because it was so unbearable, led logically to Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil. In centers of civilization, this state shows itself in the increasing insecurity of marriage. The American divorce rate has been reached, if not exceeded, in many European countries, which proves the anima projects herself by preference on the opposite sex, thus giving rise to magically complicated relationships. You think? He certainly knew that. Let me just read that last sentence again. The American divorce rate has been reached, if not exceeded, in many European countries, which proves that the anima projects herself by preference on the opposite sex, thus giving rise to magically complicated relationships. This fact, largely because of its pathological consequences, has led to the growth of modern psychology, which in its Freudian form cherishes the belief that the essential cause of all disturbances is sexuality, a view that only exacerbates the already existing conflict. There is a confusion here between cause and effect. The sexual disturbance is by no means the cause of neurotic difficulties, but is, like these, one of the pathological effects of a maladaptation of consciousness, as when consciousness is faced with situations and tasks to which it is not equal. Such a person simply does not understand how the world has altered and what his attitude would have to be in order to adapt to it. In dealing with the shadow or anima, it is not sufficient just to know about these concepts and to reflect on them, nor can we ever experience their content by feeling our way into them or by appropriating other people's feelings. It is no use at all to learn a list of archetypes by heart. Archetypes are complexes of experience that come upon us like fate, and their effects are felt in our most personal life. The anima no longer crosses our path as a goddess, but it may be as an intimately personal misadventure, or perhaps as our best venture. When, for instance, a highly esteemed professor in his 70s abandons his family and runs off with a young red-headed actress, we know that the gods have claimed another victim. Yeah, you think? This is how demonic power reveals itself to us. Until not so long ago, it would have been an easy matter to do away with the young woman as a witch. Paragraph 63. In my experience, there are very many people of intelligence and education who have no trouble in grasping the idea of the anima and her relative autonomy, and can also understand the phenomenology of the animus in women. Psychologists have more difficulties to overcome in this respect, probably because they are under no compulsion to grapple with the complex facts peculiar to the psychology of the unconscious. If they are doctors as well, their somato-psychological thinking gets in the way, with its assumption that psychological processes can be expressed in intellectual, biological, or physiological terms. Psychology, however, is neither biology nor physiology, nor any other science than just this knowledge of the psyche. The picture I have drawn of the anima so far is not complete. Although she may be the chaotic urge to life, something strangely meaningful clings to her, a secret knowledge or hidden wisdom, which contrasts most curiously with her irrational elfin nature. Here I would like to refer again to the authors already cited. Rider Haggard calls she wisdom's daughter. Benoit's Queen of Atlantis has an excellent library that even contains a lost book of Plato. Helen of Troy, in her reincarnation, is rescued from a Tyrian brothel by the wise Simon Magus and accompanies him on his travels. I purposely refrained from mentioning this thoroughly characteristic aspect of the anima earlier, because the first encounter with her usually leads one to infer anything rather than wisdom. This aspect appears only to the person who gets to grips with her seriously. Only then, when this hard task has been faced, does he come to realize more and more that behind all her cruel sporting with human fate, there lies something like a hidden purpose, which seems to reflect a superior knowledge of life's laws. It is just the most unexpected and most terrifyingly chaotic things which reveal a deeper meaning. And the more this meaning is recognized, the more the anima loses her impetuous and compulsive character. Gradually, breakwaters are built against the surging chaos, and the meaningful divides itself from the meaningless. When sense and nonsense are no longer identical, the force of chaos is weakened by their subtraction. Sense is then endued with the force of meaning, and nonsense with the force of meaninglessness. In this way, a new cosmos arises. This is not a new discovery in the realm of medical psychology, but the age-old truth that out of the richness of man's experience, there comes a teaching which the Father can pass on to the Son. Paragraph 65. The elfin nature, wisdom, and folly appear as one and the same, and they are one and the same as long as they are acted out by the anima. Life is crazy and meaningful at once, and when we do not laugh over the one aspect and speculate about the other, life is exceedingly drab, and everything is reduced to the littlest scale. There is then little sense and little nonsense either. When you come to think about it, nothing has any meaning, for when there was nobody to think, there was nobody to interpret what happened. Interpretations are only for those who don't Interpretations are only for those who don't understand. It is only the things we don't understand that have any meaning. It is only the things we don't understand that have any meaning. Man woke up in a world he did not understand, and that is why he tries to interpret it. Paragraph 66. Thus the anima and life itself are meaningless insofar as they offer no interpretation, yet they have a nature that can be interpreted, for in all chaos there is a cosmos, in all disorder a secret order, in all caprice a fixed law, for everything that works is grounded on its opposite. It takes man's discriminating understanding, which breaks everything down into antinomial judgments, to recognize this. Once he comes to grips with the anima, her chaotic capriciousness will give him cause to suspect a secret order, to sense a plan, a meaning, a purpose over and above her nature, or even, we might also be tempted to say, to postulate such a thing, though this would not be in accord with the truth. For in actual reality, we do not have at our command any power of cool reflection, nor does any science or philosophy help us, and the traditional teachings of religion do so only to a limited degree. We are caught and entangled in aimless experience, and the judging intellect with its categories proves itself powerless. Human interpretation fails, for a turbulent life situation has arisen that refuses to fit any of the traditional meanings assigned to it. It is a moment of collapse. We sink into a final depth. Apuleius calls it a kind of voluntary death. It is a surrender of our own powers, not artificially willed, but forced upon us by nature. Not a voluntary submission and humiliation decked in moral garb, but an utter and unmistakable defeat crowned with the panic fear of demoralization. Only when all props and crutches are broken and no cover from the rear offers even the slightest hope of security does it become possible for us to experience an archetype that up till then had lain hidden behind the meaningful nonsense played out by the anima. This is the archetype of meaning, just as the anima is the archetype of life itself. Paragraph 67. It always seems to us as if meaning compared with life were the younger event, because we assume with some justification that we assign it of ourselves, and because we believe equally rightly, no doubt. And we believe, equally rightly, no doubt, that the great world can get along without being interpreted. But how do we assign meaning? From what source, as the last analysis, do we derive meaning? From what source, in the last analysis, do we derive meaning? The forms we use for assigning meaning are historical categories that reach back into the mists of time, a fact we do not take sufficiently into account. Interpretations make use of certain linguistic matrices that are themselves derived from primordial images. From whatever side we approach this question, everywhere we find ourselves confronted with the history of language, with images and motifs that lead straight back to the primitive wonder world concept of Plato, and the eternal ideas are primordial images stored up in a supra-celestial place as eternal, transcendent forms. The idea of the seer perceives them as imagine et laris, or as images in dreams and revelatory visions. Or let us take the concept of energy, which is an interpretation of physical events. In earlier times, it was the secret fire of the alchemists, as phlogiston, or the heat force inherent in matter, like the primal warmth of the Stoics, or the Heraclean ever-living fire, which borders on the primitive notion of an all-pervading vital force, a power of growth and magic healing that is generally called mana. Paragraph 69. I will not go on needlessly giving examples. It is sufficient to know that there is not a single important idea or view that does not possess historical antecedents. Ultimately, they are all founded on primordial archetypal forms, whose concreteness dates from a time when consciousness did not think, but only perceived. Thoughts were objects of inner perception, not thought at all, but sensed as external phenomena, seen or heard, so to speak. Thought was essentially revelation, not invented but forced upon us, or bringing conviction through its immediacy and actuality. Thinking of this kind precedes the primitive ego consciousness, and the latter is more its object than its subject. But we ourselves have not yet climbed the last peak of consciousness, so we also have a pre-existent thinking, of which we are not aware so long as we are supported by traditional symbols, or, to put it in the language of dreams, so long as the father or the king is not dead. Okay, that's the limit of where I'm going to read today. Tomorrow I will be reading The Black Magician, which will be the fourth part of this essay. This is a 4-part reading, and so if you haven't read do that, because they're all important. And tomorrow The Black Magician is the most important of all, because it's the punchline of the essay. Let me see here. Phil says, it's amazing to see how the anima is projected onto objects such as cars and guitars, very definitely also boats and planes, I think. A friend of mine spent weeks researching hiking poles. He bought the lightest hiking pole in the world. These poles held his fascination. He, of course, forgot to bring them on the hike. It's probably a good thing, I guess. I don't know. Yes, from the mirrored personality type, I met the very manifestation, in which was the most bitter yet freeing experience I have gained. That was from Martin. Phil says, yes, my anima led me by the nose into analysis. Martin, which sadly I cannot articulate into words, but a vision of my collapsed castle is the dragon flew over. Well, I have certainly talked about my anima more than once, and she has been known to get me in trouble as well. And so it's very good to understand the anima at least as well as we can, if we're mere males. There's the old story that a man can't stand being in the presence of a naked woman. And I would simply say that we should probably add to that, a man can't stand being in the presence of a naked woman without doing something. And that, of course, challenges our morality, etc. But if we understand the anima, then perhaps we have a chance. And it's still true that if a man speaks in the desert and no woman hears him, is he still wrong? the answer to that question is yes. And if you don't understand why I say that, then you need to go back and listen to some of the earlier videos where we've addressed it. But we only bring half of the story to our life's narrative, and our partner brings the other half, and the two never actually mix, but they learn to live together. And so, anyway, in life, vis-a-vis the anima, we can only say caveat emptor. And so, anyway, I have been reading from the Archetypes of the Collective Unconscious by C.G. Jung. And in these 3 essays, I've read paragraphs 1 through 69. I still have about 10 pages to go, which I plan to schedule for 11 a.m. tomorrow, provided the work outside my window is ended for Sunday. If it's not ended, then I won't be able to go on. But anyway, I wish you all well, and thank you for joining me. And B, thank you for your comment. So, peace. I'm going to stop the stream now, but I'll be back tomorrow at 11.